And hello, everybody. Welcome to another Raw Sport interview. I am your head of sport, Joshua Sim, and we today are very fortunate and very lucky to be joined by the Athletics senior football writer, Daniel Taylor. Daniel, so thank you so much for doing this. Thank you so much for giving up some of your time.
No, you don't. Honestly, it's no problem at all, Josh.
I mean, I guess it's the standard question when it comes to kind of interviews and chats around at this particular moment. But how has the last 2 to 3 months been with football on ice, essentially?
Yeah, challenging. I think is probably the best word. It's obviously for football journalists. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's obviously bigger things at play here, so I don't want to sound too self-absorbed. But equally for football journalists and a football website, it's there's been challenges. Not having any sport to report on. Just because there aren't any sport doesn't mean that we should stop writing, or we can't just stop here for 2 months. So, well, 3 months. So, so we've carried on. I think we've actually, dare I say, done some really great stuff at the Athletic in terms of done a lot of nostalgic stuff, and and obviously just preparing for the restart.
Yeah, absolutely. You've seen. I mean, everyone, I guess, in football media has been affected by this, and a lot of there's been a lot of, like, as you said, a lot been throwback pieces and a lot of it's been interesting to see the creative ways that certainly websites and news sites have been adapting to the situation. But obviously that hasn't. I mean, that's now at least come to an end with the return of football. I just wanted to ask, what were your thoughts on yesterday's action? What was there anything that stood out at all, or what was it?
Yeah, it was. Well, the whole thing. It was a bit strange, wasn't it? I mean, with all due respect, I've never looked forward to Aston Villa against Sheffield United more in my life. It was strange. It took a bit of getting used to. I kept flicking between I wasn't at either game. I was watching on TV, and I kept flicking between. I couldn't work out whether I preferred it with sound or not. And in both cases, it's still a bit odd. I think in the end, I kind of went with the sound. It's strange. It's a bit difficult. It probably take a little bit of getting used to. I found I thought Man City played really well, and apart from maybe the first 15 minutes, Man City just played as they normally play, and you could kind of, maybe because there wasn't so much going on with the Villa game, you kind of noticed a bit more. But City, there was a lot more action, there was a lot more sort of goal mouth incidents, so you could kind of, absorb yourself into the game a little bit more, and it felt a little bit more like what we're used to. But obviously, it's all new. But equally, I saw quite a few people complaining about it on Twitter and social media, and I get the complaints, but equally, what is the alternative? The alternative is there is no football whatsoever, and the industry as a whole massively suffers. Clubs will go out of business. People will lose jobs. It's the viewing figures of yesterday were really, really high, and I think it's not ideal, but the situation we're living in the country at the moment is not ideal. So I think we just have to get on with it really and make do with what we can.
Yeah, and looking at obviously the landscape of football, obviously this has now changed not only things in the short term, but will have a knock-on effect on seasons beyond this kind of mini 9-week season. You've covered the game for quite a while now, and you've seen the game. You've covered, obviously, as you've done some investigations on issues that have plagued the game as well. So in your kind of estimation and in your opinion, what do you think will be the main, or one of the main issues that football will have to confront, and the challenges that they'll have as a result of what's happened, obviously, with the global situation? What do you think will be the kind of next thing? Is it as easy to say as the finances being the main one, or what would you think is the big issue that football faces?
Yeah, well, it is. I mean, it's probably lower down the leagues really, where it's really going to cut deep. I mean, I know of non-league teams that are really worried about their futures. I mean, I'm not talking about village teams. You're talking about sort of lower League One, League Two clubs that are really going to be, who, and especially that kind of higher end of non-league, where they really rely on They don't get TV money. They rely on basically people paying to go through the turnstiles and people paying to buy drinks in the bar during games and people buying the program and just obviously they've lost all of that income. So obviously, they do still have to pay players. So immediately they're at a massive disadvantage. So I think that's going to become a big issue. I think we'll just see the effects of that already. We've seen Real already who announced that they were going to go out of business. So already it's a big thing, but I think it will become even bigger.
Yeah, and obviously, it does mean that in a weird way, this season is going to be remembered for all sorts of things. Obviously, the break and play, and obviously up until now, in terms of the Premier League, Liverpool are obviously very dominant. But do you think this season will be kind of in years to come be perceived as more of a, I wouldn't say an asterisk, and I don't want to say negative, but with the connotation, with the effects that it will have in the long term, that will no doubt set the game a little bit back and obviously affect, as you said, teams lower down in the football pyramid. Do you think this season, when we kind of look back on it, will be remembered more for the kind of consequences and negative effects it had, or would it be still kind of remembered for some of the great football that we've seen this season as well?
There's no doubt about it. I mean, it's certainly not ideal for Liverpool. For example, haven't won the league for 30 years. It's a massive thing for them. Just huge. The league has become an obsession for Liverpool. There's no doubt about it. And then all of a sudden, it's they could have been 2 games away from winning it. Basically, it would have been such a massive occasion for Liverpool, and there's no getting away from the fact it will now feel very much anticlimactic. There's not going to be anyone inside the stadiums. There's been such a delay in the league. It all feels so kind of like fragmented now, and it doesn't change the fact that they've won the league. They deserve to win the league. They're a great team, and all the rest of the praise they've got. But it just, the league as a whole is the break. It feels really weird to pick it back up, and it's probably an easy question to answer sort of towards the end of it. But everything is changed. They're basically going to have They obviously said yesterday they're going to have the Champions League in a that actually could be quite exciting. Kind of the format that they've planned. It will be kind of like a mini tournament, basically. In a different sense to how it is now. It's very stretched out over the course of the season. Now it's all going to be condensed into a kind of a 2-week period. So that, to be fair, it might work, but it's the whole kind of, I don't know, really. It's such a difficult time for for the world and all of us have had to live with this for the last few months, and we're all getting used to it. And there is no real other option apart from not having the football. And I would rather have it and try and make it as appealing as we can. Yes, this season will be remembered, as you say, Josh, not with an asterisk as such, but it will be remembered in a sort of very strange way. It's been unique in our lives, hasn't it? We've never known anything like that before. So yeah, it's going to be. It's certainly not been the normal.
No, and obviously now it's it puts teams in a position where they have to kind of put all their energy into this kind of 9-week sprint, if you like, having prepared for a 9 or 8 or 9 month kind of marathon. So it is very interesting, and obviously I just read your piece about Ole Gunnar Solskjaer and how this is a big kind of 9-week period for him. Is that the storyline that I guess you're most intrigued by personally in this last kind of last 2 months, or
it's not the only one, but obviously it'll be interesting to see what happens with Manchester City and the Champions League ban, and how obviously Manchester City do it in the Champions League. But I do think Manchester United is very interesting because Solskjaer's management there has gone in sort of fits and starts. Really, he started off brilliantly. Then there was a long period of drift, really, where if you were thinking it wasn't working, you certainly were entitled to those thoughts, because I think in 8 months, admittedly with the summer in the middle of it, they they won 6 league games, and his record for a long time was worse statistically than Mourinho's, than David Moyes, than Van Gaal's. It was worse than Unai Emery's at Arsenal, and it was very much on a par with Pochettino's from his last the corresponding number of games. But at the same time, Pochettino took his team to a Champions League final. Whereas so there's no doubt about it that he's been treated a lot more sympathetically than other United managers have been since Ferguson, and other managers would be elsewhere. And that is purely because he is very popular at United. His history, he was such a, he wore the colours, he scored the winning goal in the Champions League final. It's just that old thing, isn't it? Just because you're a very popular ex-player, that doesn't necessarily mean you're a great manager. But these next coming sort of, if you count Europe as well, these next 2 months, he's got Pogba back with Bruno Fernandes. He's got Rashford back from injury. There's sounds a little bit cliche, but there are no excuses really. So we should be able to see now. He's got a fully fit squad apart from a couple of players that aren't necessarily first team players anyway. We should be able to see exactly how good Solskjaer is. He's not in the honeymoon period. He's, it's just a time now to see how good he is at motivating a team, and can he get United into the Champions League, and can they win a trophy or even 2?
Yeah, it is very interesting, the recent trend of obviously a lot of ex-players are now finding themselves in managerial posts, and you think about and I know obviously he's one example, but obviously Jurgen Klopp didn't have the greatest playing career himself, and is now become a world-class managerial coach. So it's really interesting, the kind of I guess the ebbs and flows, the trends, and just the trends of how the game is going. So you mentioned Solskjaer. Are there any other storylines that you're looking forward to? I know, obviously, as a Nottingham Forest fan, you'd love them to go through the playoffs in the Championship.
Yeah, that would be nice after 21 years out of the Premier League. So, well, there's lots of storylines really. I mean, obviously, the relegation issues are interesting. You sort of see. I mean, it'd be a huge story if. I think West Ham have probably got enough to stay up, but it'd be a huge story if West Ham went down with everything that's happened there, the new stadium, and if they did go down, I dread to think how their fans would react. Although possibly it might work in their favour that the fans, aren't actually there. Strangely enough, so can Sheffield United get in the Champions League places? I mean, they can feel incredibly hard done by last night with that goal, the goal that never was, because it was just so obvious, and everyone's talking about the goal line technology, but VAR, they could have stopped the game and said that was a goal. Everyone could see it on TV within seconds. It was obvious anyway. You could just tell from the player. Anyone that's been in football could just tell from the reaction. The goalkeeper was, the goalkeeper. You could see in the goalkeeper's face. You could see the players' celebrations. They weren't even appealing to the referee. They just ran off celebrating the goal. So that 2 points could cost. Can you imagine if Sheffield United don't get in the Champions League because of that? And equally, Villa might stay up because of that point. So, I mean, I quite like the controversies. We're they're all talking points, aren't they? And they're all big things. But yeah, can Sheffield United get in the Champions League? That'd be an incredible achievement. Chelsea is quite interesting. It's just similar with Solskjaer, really. Frank Lampard, very popular club legend. I think he's done a good job so far, but it's what he's not had until recently. He's not been able to sort of bring in players. I think it's what you call a good to very good job, but not perhaps a spectacular job so far from Lampard. But equally, they can finish in the Champions League, and they're still they've got an FA Cup tie at Leicester to come up, so they've still got it all to play for. So yeah, and then as you say, the Championship playoffs, which involve my team, Forest, and I've seen this in the playoffs 4 times before, and we've never even reached the final. So I don't want to tempt fate too much, but yeah, that I'll be obviously keeping my eye on that one.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And obviously under Sabri Lamouchi, I think is how you pronounce his name. Yeah. They've been doing a brilliant job. He's been on essentially I think he's on a 1-year deal, isn't it? So it's a bit of a rental, and he's kind of done very well.
1 year at Forest is quite a long stint.
Yeah,
he's done a good job. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm also just gonna bring into the conversation our deputy head of sport, Joe Spagnoli. Joe, I saw you run and get a scarf. Was that like a Nottingham Forest themed scarf or something?
Yeah, I mean, I don't support them by any means, but I am quite partial to them, and I remember that I had a couple of scarves in the wardrobe, so I went and got one in honor of Dan Taylor. There we are.
Those two stars always make, I've told my son, I live in Manchester, so I'm brainwashed my son to being a Forest fan, which is not easy when you live where I do. And yeah, I promised him we'll get a third star. I mean, clearly that's a barefaced lie, but he doesn't know, he's too young to know that.
Maybe if Clough continued, if Nigel Clough, that is, was to move over and continue the dynasty somehow, anything can happen in football. I did have a question actually. Because one of the things you're most well known for is the investigation into the English coach sex abuse scandal occurring throughout the 70s and 80s primarily. I'm assuming, perhaps I'm wrong about this, that this is a very different kind of news story to investigate than your average transfer story or managerial drama. What was your personal first step in approaching that, whether that's doing research into the matter or interviewing someone? How did you approach that scandal specifically when you were still at, I believe, The Guardian at the time?
Yeah, I was. I mean, I had a little bit of luck, but I suppose, yeah. I mean, I was approached initially about the first story, and the reason why, I mean, this doesn't sound at all conceited or anything, but I was approached because someone was a fan of my work, I suppose, at The Guardian, and basically had recommended that I might be a good person to sort of to do the story. So yes, it was Andy Woodward. He was a player at Crewe, and obviously Crewe, one of the most affected clubs. And basically, Andy and I had a mutual. Well, I mean, it wasn't someone I particularly knew, but obviously it was someone that knew my work, and basically he recommended to Andy that he came to me. And obviously, as you say, I'm usually a hamstrings, offsides, or increasingly VAR man. And so yeah, this was an entirely different ball game. Basically, I mean, the story's gone global. There's been countless people sent to prison, and countless, there's been inquiries are still ongoing. There's still people going through the court system. There's various clubs, Manchester City, Southampton, lots of clubs who've started paying out in compensation and damages. The High Court cases coming up for claims for compensation. Yeah, so so it all started in November 2016, and I went to see Andy, and basically I think one of the best things we did, we really took our time. It wasn't like I interviewed him and then just went and wrote it. We sort of spent about 3 months preparing for it, and that was probably, in hindsight, a really good decision, because it just gave us time to kind of work. And also Andy needed time. It was a massive decision to waive anonymity as a child sex abuse victim. Horrific crimes that he endured as a kid, which have shaped his life and shaped. I mean, the figures. I mean, they've stopped actually producing the figures now, but the last. There'd been something like 2,000 reports of this, and hundreds of suspects identified, and so I mean, I knew it was big. I didn't realise how big, if you know what I mean. So that initial period was pretty crazy in terms of just the phone never stopped ringing, and but strangely, I mean, one of the tactics, I suppose, if that's the right way, I never actually went and. I know of loads of ex-players and players from that time who obviously have a story to tell. But I just took a decision early on, and I hope this doesn't sound too pious, but I've never knocked on anyone's door and or rung anybody and said, oh, I believe you were coached by this coach, and you may have been one of the victims. I kind of just because I kind of I'd spent time with the initial group of players that came forward. I suppose I probably had their trust, which sort of just grew. And I'm friends with them. They're mates of mine now. I was best man at Andy's wedding, and attended another of the weddings recently. And I'm in touch with them. I speak to them all the time. And I think through that, their network, basically, people just realised that I suppose was someone that they could trust in turn, and so I had the players kind of came to me, if you know what I mean. Now maybe I could have gone. I maybe could have got spoken to even more if I'd actually been a little bit more assertive in that. But something didn't quite feel right in terms of ringing someone to basically say, were you abused as a child? I think it's a very personal thing. If they want to talk, they're going to know they want to talk. They don't need a stranger ringing them and saying, "Do you want to talk?" If that they would, if they really felt like they want to get out and open, I would like to think that they would have known. Within a few weeks, I've spoken to sort of like five players, and then obviously that everyone sees that, and then they hopefully would realise that I could be trusted.
Yeah, I was going to ask you something about how is it in terms of attaining their trust to talk about something uncomfortable. I think you covered it pretty much in your answer there. Is that investigation and that kind of whole piece or series of pieces, is that some of the most proud? Is that some of the pieces that you're most proud of when you look at your career so far? In terms of
yeah, you sort of. I always feel slightly. People often say that to me, and yes, of course, humble brag moment. It's like I've won many kind of awards for it, and it's been nice to be recognised for it, and to be part of helping. Helping to get to sit in a court and watch someone get 30 years in prison is quite a moment, and obviously a big thing for me personally. But where I always feel slightly kind of not embarrassed, but I don't want to go on about it too much. I always think that I did the easy part, really. Whereas the lads who were abused, can you imagine like the pressure they were under to basically, to put their names out there, especially footballers with all the kind of male culture that goes on in football. To basically say, I was sexually abused as a child for, X number of years. I was raped. I was molested by, just the pressure they were under to basically, and for them to actually basically come out and they automatically have anonymity as child sex abuse victims. So for them to actually sign a letter to me, because you have to have a signed letter to run something like that, to saying yes, I just and then they went to court, they went to the police. I've seen the effect it's had. It's shattered their lives in some cases. So I always feel a little bit. I don't want to be too kind of didn't I do well there, because I always think that really they did the hard work and I helped them. I did do quite reasonably well. I'm quite pleased with how I covered the case and the way I approached anything. But what they did compared to what I did doesn't really compare.
Yeah, and it is an obviously very uncomfortable topic to approach, but I think definitely in your pieces that you did it really well. I just wanted to also ask, I guess, talking about memorable pieces, is there any games or events that have been memorable for you to cover, going to a stadium and watching? Are there any that stick out?
Well, don't hate me when I say this, but after a number of years, you do. I suppose the thrill of kind of, I always love going back to the Nou Camp or somewhere like that. And I love the travel. What I'm missing at the moment is the travel as much as the games, because normally I'm sort of, flying here and there and sort of, seeing new countries and everything. It's a strange one. A lot of my mates hate it when I say this, but, I am there often to work. It's not like I'm just sitting there, just admiring the view, and obviously you've got the pressures of your work. It's, don't get me wrong. It's not, I'm not a surgeon saving someone's life or something, but equally you're working against a deadline, you're working in competition. It can be quite stressful, quite tiring, because you sleep pattern, you tend to be flying at all sorts of times. So in terms of memorable game, I'd sound very spoilt if I didn't mention, covering a World Cup final at the Maracana in Brazil. I was really nervous that day. I've done enough of this job to lose the nerves from going to, when I started, I used to sit in the press box and be really like jittery about, just worrying about whether, it's difficult sometimes when your deadlines, when there's a newspaper waiting for your work and the deadline is literally 5 minutes after the final whistle and there's a goal in extra time that changes the entire story. You're writing during the game, and you may have written like 800 words in the entire story. I always feel for the journalists that would cover the 1999 Champions League final when United scored twice in injury time. Their match reports must have been absolutely shredded. And Alex Ferguson basically, he made a point of seeing the first editions of the newspapers to see the early match reports, because 3/4 of it were basically saying where United had gone wrong, and then the top paragraph just squeezed in about 60 seconds flat was saying, rah rah United, glory, glory glory Man United, they've just won the Champions League. But whereas the rest of the match reports would have been all about how it wasn't going well for them. So there is actually a lot of stress. But I was really nervous that day at the World Cup final. I just remember thinking, I can't imagine I could ever really be at a bigger game. And then the Wi-Fi, which again you completely reliant on Wi-Fi. If the Wi-Fi stops, I can't work. And the Wi-Fi went down an hour before the game and went down for about 40 minutes. And it wasn't just myself. I could just see other journalists. Just like there was a mild panic growing. It was the biggest game of our lives, and we couldn't communicate because our phones were reliant on the Wi-Fi, and we couldn't get on email. We couldn't, and fortunately it came back on. But it was just, I kind of. I would have loved to have been there, not working. I think I'd have enjoyed it a lot more than actually being there. But I was still, you're part of you can't forget you're part of a mate of mine said to me, you are watching history. You're in a privileged position, so I shouldn't lose sight of that fact.
Yeah, and you talked about match reports changing on one goal in the last minute. I've been in that situation. It's a horrendous one to have to change up the entire opening paragraph.
It's a real skill that people don't realise. But you have. So if you're given 1,000-word match report, and if you were covering, I don't know, Liverpool when they kind of pretty much blew the league at Crystal Palace that time when they gave away that, your match is structured and you're right, and then all of a sudden the whole story can change in obviously it often does in injury time, and you have very little time to save yourself. And I've seen people kind of just almost freeze in that moment. You have to, and certainly when I was younger, I used to, find, you are suddenly shrouded in a bit of panic. And I think a bit of experience can help. You just realise you have to stay calm, and because if you still have to work, you have no choice but to actually write, to try and save yourself, basically. So it goes the other way. If a team's 3-0 up after an hour, you can kind of enjoy the last half an hour because you know that normally the story isn't going to change. But it's just those awful times where everything is packed into the last 2 or 3 minutes, and you're looking at your match report and it's just been entirely ruined. The story's entirely changed, and you are sending in something that you know is not really telling the full story. But the beauty of The Athletic is that I don't really have to do it anymore. I'm really talking there about sort of newspaper restrictions, because obviously they have deadlines, whereas fortunately now one of the things I enjoy about The Athletic is that we have a little bit longer to work on our pieces, and some of those pieces you're sending for first edition aren't worth reading. I'm very honest about that. There's just, they don't tell the true story. They might tell the story up to 75 minutes of the game, but that isn't the 90-minute match. So it's far better, I think, to be working under the new, well, I wouldn't say restrictions because there aren't restrictions, but just the new way of working that I am now.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think you can definitely catch more of your work in The Athletic. A lot of good work, and obviously, there's certainly more stories to tell with the end of the season. I guess as a final question, and you mentioned that the skill there of changing up a match report on a dime, really, when something happens. Is there any other kind of pieces of general tips or advice you'd give to someone who's looking to get into football or sports journalism, or things you wished you knew when you were younger? Is there anything you have that share?
Well, I was very lucky, really, because I was I'd left school. I went straight from A levels to my local newspaper, It just so happened at the time that they were, the timing was perfect. They were advertising for a Cub reporter. But it was my mum who saw the advert in the back of the paper. I hadn't seen it, but I didn't go to college. I didn't go to uni. I think it's harder now because, I mean, that certainly didn't help, didn't hinder me, if you know what I mean. And I'll be honest, having a degree wouldn't have changed anything for me in terms of like how I can work. I wish I had another language, because that certainly does help. And the journalists I know who speak 2 or 3 languages, that really does, I do see that helps. And, but yeah, so I was lucky. I think you still need a bit of luck sometimes, because there are few jobs out there, and there's lots of people who want them. So you have to persevere first and foremost. I suppose this sounds like a really bad football team talk. You have to kind of like really want it, I suppose, because you might get knocked back. So I wrote to, I'm a Forest fan. I wrote to the Nottingham Evening Post. I wrote to absolutely bloody everyone, basically, like trying to, every time, there used to be, I don't know if it still goes anymore, the Press Gazette, and they used to have like a load of jobs in the back pages. And I wrote to the Exeter local paper, and couldn't even drive at the time. My dad gave me a lift down to Exeter, so it's like a 5-hour drive, and I don't even get a reply, so I didn't get a reply to the job interview, which is, I found a letter of my knockbacks, and it's it's a sizable letter, basically. I found an envelope of my knockbacks, and there's a sizable file of letters basically saying, thanks but no thanks. So I persevered. So you have to persevere, because it's not easy getting in. I definitely say in this new age of social media, try and get your work out there. Try and get a blog up there. Try not just get your blog, but try and get it on a site that it'll be noticed. There are football sites. Try and, if you can't necessarily get onto a newspaper straight away, try and get noticed by decent football websites, and then you might, like kind of move up the ladder, I suppose. And yeah, just keep badgering away. Just and also, I suppose it sounds a bit corny, but you've obviously got to be quite good, I suppose, to be noticed. So just keep working at it. Really, I know there's a lot of journalism students that want places that aren't necessarily there. So that's the hard thing. There's no point in me saying, it will all come out, because I know people that I thought would be really good journalists that just gave up in the end. Working in different professions now because they just couldn't get their foot in, really, and in the end they needed a salary. And I felt really, people that I know went on journalism courses and would have made, I could see that they were talented, but just it is difficult. So you need to be pushy, I think, in a good way, and certainly not lose heart if you get knocked back, or because I think the first step is the hard, getting on the ladder. Once you're on it, then you can stay on it. Hopefully, it's getting on there that's possibly the hardest leap.
Yeah, that's really excellent advice and some really useful tips. And you mentioned luck. Well, we've been lucky to have you for the last half hour. I know we've run a little bit over, so apologies for that. But again, that will bring, I guess, a wrap to this kind of mini interview. But thank you so much to the Athletics senior football writer Daniel Taylor. I think we've put social medias down throughout the video, so you can probably find his Twitter account among the ticker. Thanks to Joe Spagnoli, as always, for joining me, and we will be back on Saturday with some sort of football show. Probably we will bring something together. But thanks for joining us.